Hi, my name is William Honolulu Jr., and I am the General Manager of BlackUSA.news. BlackUSA.news is committed to making sure that our community gets information about candidates directly from the candidates. As part of our continuing coverage of Maryland's 2022 election season, we will be replaying shows featuring candidates for office. To find out which shows will be airing when, please don't hesitate to visit www.blackusa.news. Please also make sure that you like and subscribe to make sure that you get updates from Black USA News. Thank you.
This week's episode 8, People Over Politics. I am the host, Martin Mitchell, and today we have a very special guest, Judge Katie O'Malley. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Martin. I'm really happy to be here.
Yes, of course. And of course, there might be some people who don't know about you. Of course, you're a dynamic public figure. So tell the people a little bit something about you. Give us your elevator.
All right. Thanks, Martin. Thanks for saying I'm dynamic. That's really impressive and sweet of you. So I've been a judge for the past 20 years in the District Court of Maryland. And prior to that, I was an assistant state's attorney for 10 years. So, I tried hundreds of cases in front of judges and jurors and advocating for victims of all types of crimes, from petty theft to domestic violence to, sadly, many homicides. I worked with our specialty courts as a judge for the past 20 years, doing a lot of diversion work when it came to drug treatment, mental health issues, veterans treatment. And we also had a court for homeless people, which we now call Court for Homelessness. So we've done, and I've done as a judge for the past 20 years, a lot of work in helping and heal people when they got into the criminal justice system. But also as a judge, I didn't handle just criminal cases. I handled thousands and thousands of cases involving civil disputes, landlord-tenant issues, housing violations where, people were living in horrible conditions and they needed, had filed suits so that they could go after either the landlord and or the individual who was supposed to be registered as the management of the property. So it's been a great career, and again, for 30 years I've been advocating for people in our court system, finding solutions for real people who have had real problems. And what I've learned from going to court for fighting for justice day in and day out makes me a really strong and effective attorney general on day one, because attorney generals go to court. That's what they do. The assistants, day in and day out, are going to the district court, the circuit court, and the appellate courts, and even the Supreme Court of the United States. And I know that because I've had them appear before me many times on cases involving things like wage theft, for labor violations. I've had them come in for housing issues. I've had them come in on environmental crimes that have affected the citizens of the state. And they're hardworking lawyers that need a leader that's actually been there trying cases. When I left the state's attorney's office, I was head of the white collar crime unit. I managed detectives and lawyers resolving white collar crime and economic fraud cases. And, I have to tell you, I learned a lot about managing those cases and helping to build those cases with the investigators from the ground level. And that's the kind of attorney general Maryland needs. Not someone that's just been a lawyer, but someone that's actually been in the courtrooms fighting and advocating for Marylanders day in and day out.
Okay. Well, you gave us a little bit more than an elevator, but I do appreciate it because you gave me somewhere to start. So I know you mentioned wage theft, right?
Mm-hmm.
As one of the cases you were interested in and you definitely tried before. So what are your opinions on wage theft, and how will the AG's office, or how can the AG's office address wage theft, in the state of Maryland?
Well, it comes with these quarterly roundtables that the Attorney General right now has set up, but it also comes with having a hotline for people to report the wage theft. Oftentimes, Martin, these are victims that are vulnerable because they have to really rely on their employer. And if they are a whistleblower, they will lose their job. So, what I proposed when I was talking months ago about labor and labor issues is that we have a workers' protection unit full time. So it's not just waiting for the quarterly meetings to sit down and talk to the different unions and heads of these unions, but to have a workers' protection unit where there can be an attorney general, an assistant that works on those cases and those complaints on a daily basis, and then forms the needed investigation to go in and beyond, just the reporting. Because I think if you wait too long to report those cases, the evidence goes away. So it's really important to have a unit that is set up and designated just to dealing with those types of crimes as they occur throughout the state with all kinds of different employers, union and non-union.
And that is important. I would agree with you. I would agree with you. And so the next thing I would ask you is, initially, of course, the AG, the way that I look at it is it's a position, that isn't at the forefront for the most part, but it is important. So for some people, who don't understand what the AG does, how would you put it in most layman terms?
Thanks, Martin. It is the chief legal officer for the entire state. So the attorney general, like I said, is the chief legal officer that attorney generals go to court day in and day out, fighting for Marylanders and fighting for Maryland's interests. The attorney general also represents all the state agencies and has to give legal advice to each department, whether it's the Department of Environment, the Department of Transportation, Motor Vehicles Administration. So you have over 400 lawyers that are working in a variety of different units. There's 19 special different units. And the big areas that affect people's day in and day out lives that they can really relate to when you talk about the office are consumer protection, environmental crimes, and then organized crime unit and public safety. So those three areas are probably one of the most busiest, those are the busiest units in the office, where you have lawyers day in and day out advocating for Marylanders when it comes to environmental justice, when it comes to consumer protection, economic justice, and when it comes to criminal justice and criminal justice reform. So those are three main areas that the Attorney General works on day in and day out. And it's, also the Attorney General gets to, during the legislative session, ask the legislators to sponsor bills with the AG that are for public safety, like banning ghost guns, or whether the Attorney General is advocating for, being able to sue fossil fuel companies for the climate change damage that they've caused. So for 90 days, the AG sort of works as a lobbyist, lobbying good things, good legislation in the legislature. But 365 days of the year, the Attorney General is going to court.
And one of the things, me as a city council person, one of the things I think I remember most recently is a lawsuit against opioid manufacturers, and I believe the city joined the lawsuit, so they're going to be getting money, like a lot of other cities. So I know that's one of the recent lawsuits.
Right, that was multi-state. That was joined in, right? So AG Frosch joined in with other states, because across our country, we all know of families, if not within our own family, where people's lives have been lost as a result of the opioid crisis, especially during the pandemic. And one of the things I'm most proud about that I did as a judge was sit in drug treatment court, working with folks that came into my courtroom that really just didn't need to be in jail. They needed treatment. And for those 3 years, I worked with substance abuse services and mental health services to get these individuals the treatment they needed, to give them the structure that they needed to stay clean and sober. And it was one of the most rewarding parts of being a judge, because we would have graduation ceremonies twice a year for all of the clients that would come in and have a graduation ceremony with their families, and then we could expunge their records. So it was really a great thing.
I love to hear about expungements, giving people freedom on paper, because we know a lot of times, after after going through the penal system, sometimes we're treated as a second-class citizen, even they're after free. So
especially for employment, Martin. I mean, some of the dumbest things were on people's records that aren't even illegal anymore. So I was really proud a few years ago. The Maryland legislature, was able to get a lot of great expungement laws put on the books. And I have to tell you, every day I would sign hundreds and hundreds of expungement papers, because great services across the state, especially legal aid, would file on behalf of people that would come in for free, so they could get their records expunged, and they could then go forward, getting a job and not having to answer for something that happened 20 years ago.
Yes, yes, and you know, I think I remember seeing you on a panel I was on in Annapolis recently. Did you testify on one of the cannabis bills?
Yes, Chairman
Okay,
Clippinger's bill. I have
okay,
to tell
yeah.
you,
So I definitely.
yeah, I'm so happy. I'm happy that that is being presented, and hopefully this session, it will go through and become part of the referendum. Because, I talked to Mayor Scott, who I think is doing a really great job in Baltimore City, and we've sat down and talked about crime and ways to approach, saving people's lives in our city from gun violence. And one of the major things he and I both agreed on is that so many people are losing their lives over the illegal sale of marijuana. Yet I can't tell you how many sad search warrants I've signed for murder cases where the scenario of the shooting happened and the murder over the sale of marijuana. And if we can just take that out of the picture, I think we could solve a lot of violence. And then, some of the opponents say, well, they're just going to rob the marijuana stores. And I said, well, they rob 7-Elevens and we don't shut them down. People get robbed and so you can't use that as an excuse.
That's a fear tactic. That's a fear tactic in a sense. And I'll be fair with you. I'm a cannabis advocate. So I'm happy to see, cannabis bills move forward, especially the referendum, letting the people decide. But I will say that, I'm not happy with 837 because, I did have amendments for the bill. I was favorable with amendments. A lot of those amendments still are still not being taken into consideration because I think even thinking of one of it was the possession, which was 1.5 ounces, right?
Mm-hmm. That's a lot of marijuana.
Sure, but I can take 2 ounces on a vacation for personal use.
Right.
Does that mean I'm distributing?
No, but Martin,
that's just one point.
Well, I can tell you right now, that wouldn't even be charged in Baltimore City, but more than likely, because it's not happening as a charge in Baltimore City. But that's a phase-in period so that we can allow for the referendum, as I understood the bill. That's not going to be the permanent part of the bill. Once it's passed, it's passed.
I do understand that. But my problem is I feel like we have to get it right in the forefront and not and like the thought is like there's some components of the bill that in which we like, right? And there's some components of the bill in which we don't like. I think that 2 plants is not a lot. Especially from like a medical perspective, right? From a medical perspective, 2 plants is definitely not a lot. So,
but what is the civil? Because it's not criminalized. The 1.5 ounces would be a civil penalty of like $100, something like that. It doesn't. It's still decriminalized, and marijuana has been decriminalized, and so it wouldn't allow any arrest. So you could have 5 ounces, and that's still not going to be an arrest, and unless at all.
I think it moved to a misdemeanor. like that, from my understanding.
So that's just, however, until the referendum passes, I think, as well as looking at the
the phase in until the
right.
Yes, that is correct. You're 100% right. You're 100% right. But I mean, I even think Jill Carter's bill goes further because I like the fact of vacation of these charges. And I heard in the hearing that the only charges that would be up for expungement are just cannabis. Just solely cannabis charges, like ones that so essentially if it was, I forget how you would classify it, but when you're charged with multiple things, so like those wouldn't be considered. Those wouldn't be considered under this legislation.
Well, if you're charged with possession of some bit of marijuana, but you're also charged with murder, the murder is going to go forward. The possession of marijuana wouldn't. So sometimes people are charged not simply with the possession, but other serious crimes. And I say murder, that's the most extreme. But, say, distribution with a gun, other things that heighten it up. So just the simple possession goes away, but any of those other crimes against persons or public safety would remain.
Yes. And I almost cringe sometimes when we talk about the extreme and murder is always the extreme. Right. So like, even my conversations with, State's Attorney Scott Schellenberger, like a lot of times, I told him he only mentioned a few different crimes, in an hours long conversation. And the reason he mentioned those crimes is because it was a tactic to, you know, uh, make people more fearful and to think like, okay, yes, we do need to be, strong on law enforcement and, strong for the police. You kind of understand where I'm going there. You definitely.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, he's a prosecutor, and in part of
Sure.
the Attorney General's office, you do have prosecution. But I've found, as being a prosecutor for 10 years and then a judge for 20 years, there's a balance to all of it. And I gotta tell you, Martin, as a judge sitting once in Baltimore City, I had a whole trial, and it was over possession of cocaine. And I found, I won't give you the whole boring details of it, but I found that two detectives who had sworn to tell the truth, they held up their hand, lied under oath. And I couldn't believe it. I was so upset because I'd never made a finding like that in my entire career. Although I'm sure it's happened, but I mean, it was so blatant that I had to, I acquitted the defendant, and I then made a phone call immediately to the Internal Investigations Division to report it, because I had to. I mean, that was ethically, I needed to do that. And nothing
Absolutely.
ever happened with that report. Nothing happened at all. I never got a phone back. I never got a letter in the mail. I never got an email. 2 years later, those detectives were then involved in some other sort of investigation, and then finally got removed from the force. But, I thought, here I am, a sitting judge, and I'm making a report. Not that I'm any better than any regular citizen, but if a sitting judge makes a report and says, I believe these two officers lied under oath, I should find out something. So it just made me realize how difficult it must be for a regular, citizen to make a report to say that something happened that was unethical or illegal with their interaction with the police. So I am a huge advocate for more accountability and transparency in policing, because I have to tell you, I think a majority of the men and women who join the police force do so with the best intentions, and they go to work day in and day out. They're risking their lives to keep our communities safe. And I truly believe that the majority of law enforcement is like that. But there are those, and law enforcement will tell you, they know bad apples that are in the force. And we need to make sure that they are taken out swiftly and promptly so that they don't do further damage to the community and further violence in the community. So that's one of the key things that I talk about in my campaign. I was the only candidate to release policy within weeks of after entering this race. So it's something that's near and dear to me, again, because of all my experiences.
Hi, my name is William Honolulu Jr., and I'm the host of the BlackUSA.news morning show and the president of the Grinding Gang Incorporated. The Grinding Gang is an organization that helps small business owners in the nonprofit and for-profit communities figure out how to make sense of all the noise. There's a lot of information out there, and sometimes it gets a little overwhelming. We help you develop business plans. We help you figure out what to do with a lot of the information you receive, and we also help you figure out how to become more profitable. We also host a variety of workshops. You can check out our next workshop on grant writing right here.
And speaking of that, are you a proponent or in favor of mobile crisis units? And
no,
is that something that you would champion?
Yes, and I think the model that we need to use when it comes to the mobile crisis unit is the model that they started years back in Anne Arundel County. They have one of the best in the state, probably East Coast. So I am definitely in favor of that, because so many individuals are suffering from mental health crises. And I know from sitting in court and actually going to the commissioner's office at 3 a.m. sometimes to help a loved one sign out an involuntary an involuntary commitment, because that's part of what we do when we're on duty. And I can't tell you over the 20 years how many times I have gone into the commissioner's office after hours and heard from loved ones who needed to have their family member committed because of a mental health illness. And they were afraid not only that that person was going to hurt themselves, but that they might be harmed because of their mental state and how violent they were. And they didn't want them to be a fatality. So it's very, very crucial. And in Baltimore City, Mayor Scott has actually begun that process with getting mental health services, because I've seen them come into the court with people during normal court hours.
No, I mean, they're very crucial. And, I know the bill has not made much leeway in the state. But, they are very crucial, because the thought is every interaction doesn't need, an armed officer. And at the end of the day, the constituent, the resident, the people, they could benefit from this, treating it as a mental health response, instead of, an armed officer response. And then the thought is it frees up the officer's time to go, actually secure the community.
Yeah.
So it's very important.
I
Okay.
agree.
Okay. And so one of the things that I wanted to ask you was, due to the lack of transparency in the judiciary, we don't really know most of the time of the impact of the judges that most of the time the impact the judges have on the society. So you talked about being on the bench for a while. What have you done?
20 years.
Yes, exactly. 20 years. What have you done in criminal justice in Maryland? As they continue to, because Maryland we know has a history of incarcerating Black people, more per capita than any other state. So, what have you done to address that? And like, where do you fit in? What exactly can you give me there?
Well, Martin, the court system is open to the public. So the courtrooms are open as long as court is in session. If that's 8:30 at night, and I've had trials go that late, the court is open because it has to be by law, by the Constitution. The courts are open. Not only are the courts open whenever there's a hearing, because we are prohibited by law from closing the courtrooms to public, every single thing that a judge says about the case in the courtroom, which is where you have to sentence. You're not allowed to sentence anybody in your chambers. You're not allowed to examine witnesses outside of the courtroom. Everything happens in the courtroom, and it's all recorded. All of those recordings are available to anybody that wants them. And if you can't afford the transcript because you're indigent, there's a form that you fill out and you request it to have the transcript given to you for free, which I've signed plenty of those when people have come for court. Now, there's legislation currently pending when it comes to having cameras in the court, and year after year after year, that's been presented to the legislature, and it never has been passed. I'm not opposed to it as far as people being able to see what's happening in the courtroom. However, there is especially, where I've tried cases in the city and the county, and I've actually sat in Harford County and Anne Arundel, there is a real fear of witnesses when they come to court without cameras in the courtroom. They're scared to death in many cases of retaliation, and they should be, because there have been plenty of retaliatory murders. So having the courtroom visual, I'm for, but making sure witnesses and victims' faces are not on the camera, and making sure that their voice is disguised, and any other identifying factors that would keep them safe. And I know that that's been the huge issue with the State's Attorneys Association. It's hard enough to get witnesses to come in, especially in domestic violence cases. And I was a national leader in teaching judges about how to handle domestic violence cases. And for at least 10 years while I was a judge on the district court, I trained all of our new judges on best practices in domestic violence cases. And the domestic violence cases are really tough, Martin, because having the victim come in and testify about his or her loved one is a difficult challenge as it is, but also not knowing what to expect from the judiciary and from the judge or from the prosecuting office, and whether they're going to be further victimized by the system has always been a big hurdle in getting victims to come forward so that they are safe, because we've seen a huge increase in domestic murders over the pandemic, but it wasn't slowing down that much before. And I've been working as an advocate in this area for 30 years. I've traveled to Russia. I've traveled to Ukraine, went on a mission with federal and state judges to train on, domestic violence and domestic violence best practices. So it's not just a state problem, a national problem, it's an international problem. And when it comes to having, courtrooms open and visible, it's, recording it, fine. And even having people on, cameras in the courtroom, I'm fine with, but we have to make sure these victims and witnesses are safe.
Yes. Are we in favor of canceling no-knock warrants? and
They
actually,
got canceled.
no,
Well, no, no, they
they
didn't
did not get
get
canceled. They
right.
didn't get canceled completely.
You're right. It
No,
has to be
we got to be
signed
clear.
off. It used to be that you could come in as a detective and ask for a no-knock warrant, and you had to show there was some reasonable belief, reliable belief, that the person that they were having the warrant for had a firearm. Now, what they have to do in order to get a no-knock warrant served or signed, excuse me, is they have to have the state's attorney who's requesting it sign off on it first. And it has to only be during certain hours. So you can't have a no-knock warrant like they had in that horrible case with Breonna Taylor. You can't have a no-knock warrant at 3 in the morning. It has to be between morning hours and early evening. So if there's some reason to believe that there's a firearm and you have in that warrant reliable information from the person, like a CI, a confidential informant, that says there are firearms there and someone's life could be at risk if there was not a no-knock, then the ASA in charge of that case signs off on it, and a judge still has the discretion to deny it or to grant it because they're very dangerous. So the legislature passed that last session in 2021.
Yes, hey, it's part of the story that I believe in Maryland is like, hey, we're somewhat progressive, but we don't go far enough, and that's just me being honest because as you said, yes, there's sometimes serious incidents and serious cases, but I'll be clear that there's sometimes where it's bad information, or just unintended consequences, collateral damage, right? So that's just me being honest about it.
Well, no, you're not just honest about it. You're 100% correct. That you can never ever protect or guard against some bad actor putting fake information in a warrant. They have the gun trace task force, those in Baltimore City. Can't tell you how many warrants that they presented to judges to have signed, and we all know now that a good portion of those were lies. So it's something that needs to be addressed and looked at. And whenever I signed a warrant, I was very, very careful about it because you can't just be knocking down people's doors. It's traumatic, and especially if there's children in the home. So they're very, very serious tools that law enforcement has, and the judges take that very seriously. And I know I did as a judge.
Yes, and one other question, because I've talked to many different states attorneys. Do you believe that juveniles are irredeemable? And yes, this is a loaded question. The reason I say this is because Scott Schellenberger, and I named him because we had the same conversation, and it was about juvenile life. I said that I don't believe in juvenile life. And he presented some arguments in which he believed in juvenile life. Of course, I still don't believe that to this day. So what is your position on juvenile life?
Listen, these cases are all very, very different. I think right now in our juvenile justice system, juveniles do get an opportunity to have their sentence reviewed after a period of time, so that there essentially is an opportunity to review them. The cases in the juvenile justice system are actually, when a juvenile gets put into the juvenile justice system, the Attorney General has a juvenile justice system monitoring unit where the AG has to make sure that the Department of Juvenile Services is adequately caring for these kids. Because there's nothing more heartbreaking to me than to see kids locked up. It's nothing more heartbreaking to me to see a kid involved in a murder. I mean, you wonder how did that happen? And that's why for 12 years when I was in the court, district court, I volunteered as a truancy court judge in 4 different schools so that I could sit down with kids and their parents and educators to resolve the issues that were going on that were keeping a kid out of school. Because we all know, if you're in school and you have great mentors and you're learning and you're getting confident and, building your education, there's nothing greater for a kid than that and the love of their family or, friends. So the juvenile justice system always just tears at my heart. And I think right now there's a bill that is asking that the juvenile justice waiver system be flipped. I'm sure you're familiar with it, Martin, because right now there's certain crimes that if you commit them as a juvenile, you're automatically charged as an adult. And then your lawyer can ask that you be waived back to the juvenile system, but it's automatic charged as an adult. I think we need to flip that. We need to make it you're automatically charged as a juvenile, then you let the state request to have you be charged as an adult, and then you let a judge make the decision. And I think that's a really smart bill, and I hope that passes, because some of the factors that they're using is like the appearance of the juvenile. Well, you might be a 15 or 16-year-old kid and look like you're 20. But that doesn't mean, and I know because I've had kids, that doesn't mean that your frontal lobe has fully developed and you really understand the consequences of what you're doing. So it is really one of the most difficult scenarios when we're talking about juvenile justice, because you want to believe and hope and that there's redemption for kids, and at the same time you look at families who have lost loved ones as a result of a juvenile crime, and it's just these things have to be balanced, and each case is different. There aren't any two similar juveniles, so that's why I think when they're in the system, sadly, if they've been convicted of a serious crime like murder, that there be a period of time where there's a review. Because people change, and we want, if someone's in the juvenile justice system, that they're being rehabilitated. That's the whole purpose of it. Rehabilitated, giving them resources so they can get their GED, giving them resources so they can learn a skill, so that their mental health is being addressed. All of these things need to be happening when we put kids in jail.
Absolutely, and. Of course, we've had a very in-depth conversation. I appreciate it. So, on a more lighter scale, are you a Pepsi or Coke type person?
Diet Coke all the way.
Diet Coke, okay.
Mm-hmm.
So it's still Women's History Month. Who's your women's history idol? Who are you looking up to?
Wow, that's a good one. Number one is my mom. She went to law school. And then she had to drop out because she didn't have to, but she got married, and back in the 50s, that's what you did. So my mom, and then my grandmom, because she was working during the Depression, and even though she was married, she was not allowed to say she was married or she'd lose her job. But she was a strong math student, and she was an accountant with Maryland Casualty Company. So I had these great, strong women in my background that I'm very, very proud of. And again, certainly, I got to tell you, our new nominee to be the next Supreme Court Justice just is such a trailblazer, and I'm so proud of how she handled herself. So I'm really looking forward to having Justice Jackson on the bench.
Yes, you're 100% right. What is your favorite Maryland event? Annual event?
Gosh,
yes,
I'd have to say my favorite.
Nobody else is gonna feel jealous.
Yeah, that's a good question. It's not Preakness, because there's way too many people there. My favorite,
maybe more exclusive. Maybe an exclusive one. Who knows, right?
I don't do anything exclusive. I'm trying to think. My favorite Maryland event. It's definitely, it used to be the Flower Mart. When we had in Baltimore City, we had the Flower Mart. But it feels like since the last 2.5 years, we haven't really had any great spring events. So I'd have to say, historically, it's been the Flower Mart in Baltimore City, where everybody gets together and there's great flowers to buy, and there's kids from all the different public schools performing, and you have some, lemon. Have you ever had this, Martin? It's, you take a half a lemon and you put a peppermint stick in it. Yeah. Maybe it's, So anyway, they would sell those. So I have to think, I'm really aching for spring now. So it would have to be Flower Mart, and I'm hoping that we're having it again this year.
Well, awesome. I got to check out that event myself, and I'll do you one better. You got to come down to Laurel. We have Main Street Festival happening, and the 4th of July Festival. So I would say those are two historic events. Themselves. So definitely check them out.
Do you guys have parades?
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. Yes. I think last year
I've been in them.
Last year we had a few candidates and stuff at the parade. So definitely come on through.
I would love to. Thanks, Martin. It's been great hanging out here and talking to you.
Yes. And so tell people how they can stay connected with you. Of course, we got some time until the elections. But yeah.
We have a lot of time until the election. So I'm really happy about that, because it gives me much more of an opportunity to get all around the state and talk about why the Attorney General's office is so important to voters. It's just as equally as important as the governor's office, because like I said, it's chief legal officer for the state, protecting Marylanders from consumer fraud, our environment right now. We've all seen the extreme weather events that have affected not only the nation, sadly, just last week, the tornado in New Orleans, but also our great state. We have had extreme weather events, and it's not going to get better unless we have an attorney general that fights for environmental justice and has the experience to do that as a strong advocate, as a strong lawyer who's had those skills in the courtroom. I'm excited about other areas in the AG's office as well, joining in with other states to protect Maryland, like Attorney General Frost did with the opioid crisis. And my father, who was Attorney General many years ago, actually led the litigation against or the fight against the tobacco industry so that they stopped selling tobacco products. Well, not stopped selling them, but stopped advertising tobacco products to kids, to teens, and making it sound as though tobacco wasn't as dangerous as we all know that it is today. And that's why there's been that was a huge settlement. So that's still giving money to Marylanders, as will the settlement with the opioid crisis. So it's a really important job, and it's for someone who seriously just wants to be Attorney General. I'm talking about the rule of law, not the rule of politics here. So if you want to get involved with the campaign, I would hope you would reach out. We are a Katie4MD. That's KATIEFORMD.com. Just feel free to ask for a lawn sign, a bumper sticker, or a volunteer. We could use your help, and I look forward to being in your county to meet and greet with you, hopefully in person, Martin.
Yes, I look forward to it, and you enjoy the rest of your week for sure, and I appreciate you for coming on.
No, it's my pleasure. Take care.
Yes. And we have a very special guest coming up. One of my favorite people in the cannabis community. Hey, what is going on, Doc?